So in this circular flow of income, firms, households, इनका एक relationship है. To explain the relationship in the most basic way, we say that firms produces goods and services and sells them to the households, and the households who are the consumers makes the payment for these by doing the spending, expenditure. But at the same time, households provides factors of production for the goods and services produced, while in return, the firms have to pay them the rewards, the incomes for the four factors of production, which is land, labor, capital, enterprise. For land, the firms pay them the rent. For the labor, they pay them the wages. For capital, interest, and entrepreneur profits. Right? ये एक आपका circular flow था. So we say that whenever an individual earns an income, whenever an individual earns an income, this is what they do with it. They consume some and they save some. अब इसमें होता क्या है? Like, if an individual earns $100, they'll probably consume about 80 of it and they'll save about 20 of that. ये एक, I'm just giving a rough idea. Obviously, income to income, this particular thing should vary. That how much portion of that income do you consume and how much portion you save. Uh, so two-sector economy mein, what we learned in AS also is that sometimes people decide to save money. And whenever you save money, what happens is that that money is no more part of the circular flow of income in terms of incomes earned or spending done. The money leaves the system, and this is what we call a withdrawal. The money goes out of the system and it slows the economy down because this money is not becoming part of the expenditure by the consumers. So obviously firms will see that not much expenditure is coming, so let's not spend money on the factors of production, and so they're going to pay less. But the good thing is what happens is the money that you saved, hopefully in the banks, that money comes back into the system when firms go to these banks and they borrow that money. So हमने ये बात को establish किया from this is that whenever you save money, that savings actually converts into investment. Okay? So that brings us to an idea that anything that is produced in a country is bought by consumers or bought by businesses in the form of investment. Like, for example, if I say if Pakistan is producing Toyota Corollas, then who's buying Toyota Corollas? So we say consumers buy it, we say businesses buy it. In a two sector, I'm not going towards government and foreigners right now, but this is what happens. अब ये टू सेक्टर की इकोनॉमी है जिसमें सेविंग्स और इन्वेस्टमेंट्स का हम कुछ डिस्कशन करें. Today's lecture is not about C but about I. In my first lecture, I've explained the whole consumption wala element, which was what? Which was, if you look at the table, this table is showing how when national income rises, consumption also rises. When इसको अगर मैं बिल्कुल माइक्रो पे ले जाऊं और एक इंडिविजुअल के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से बात करूं, दिस इज व्हाट हैपेंस. If an individual has zero income, the individual will have to spend on something: food, clothing, rent, housing. Even if an individual does not have an income, they need to spend to survive. ये जो spending हुई है, that even if income is zero, you have to spend some money. That is called autonomous consumption. Autonomous means independent of income, and everyone has to do it. But you notice when your income increases, your consumption also increases. Okay?
Sure.
इसमें, yeah,
Could you repeat autonomous consumption? What does that
sure.
mean?
Yeah.
Thank you.
What it means is autonomous simply means in the model के sense में that it is a variable which is independent of income. Whether I have income or not, whether my income is rising or not, doesn't matter. I have to spend 500 rupees, and so I will. It's sort of like an individual whose daily expenditure, monthly expenditure of household is 5 lakh rupees. All right. But this guy lost his job. Income को क्या होगा? So income will go to zero. But will they stop spending? So we say no, 5 lakh रुपए की basic spending the household needs to do for the kids, traveling or fees or food or groceries, electricity, rent. You have to spend this money whether you have income or not. So autonomous basically means that even if your income is zero, you have to spend the money. इस फ्यूचर के अंदर हम इवन कहेंगे कि गवर्नमेंट, how Pakistani government, there's certain amount of money the government has to spend on administration, on public goods, on merit goods, on public corporations. So they have to spend certain X amount of money. अब मुल्क में taxes बढ़े या ना बढ़े, the government feels we have to spend this much amount of money to keep the country running. तो उसमें मैं autonomous government spending कह सकता हूँ because it's independent of income. अब जीडीपी जब राइज कर सकती है या इनकम्स जब राइज कर सकती हैं तो आपकी स्पेंडिंग भी बढ़ती है नेचुरली. That's the second type of expenditure, which is called induced. If you notice here that when your income went up from 0 to 500, your spending did not just remain at 500, your spending did actually increase to 750. And that's what people do. When your income goes up, your spending also rises with that. And that's what we're trying to show over here that when income rises, consumption also rises. But one of the things that we also did was in our table, we showed how that when income was rising and your consumption was rising, we noticed that our savings, which was negative, तो ये table क्या बता रहा है कि when your income is zero, and you're spending 500, you're naturally spending that from your savings. So savings went negative 500. When your income went up and your consumption went up, now from your savings, you're not eating so much away from your savings. You're only eating 250 from. When your income rose, your consumption equalized to the income and your savings is zero. And after 1,000 ki income, you start building your savings. Mind you, your consumption is also rising, but not at that pace. Okay. And that's what happens with people as their income goes up. So, इसके पीछे there were a lot of calculation things that we did, but what we did was we drew this diagram. जो consumption के numbers हैं, if you notice here, let me show you. The same numbers that I've worked over here in this table, that how zero income के ऊपर 500 का consumption है, फिर 500 की income पे 750 है, so 500 पे 750 right here, 1,000 की income पे 1,000 है. So I drew the consumption का line and I also drew the savings का line because ये आगे जाके model step by step इसके अंदर हम एलिमेंट्स को ऐड करेंगे बिकॉज रिमेंबर राइट नाउ वी ओनली डीलिंग विद इनकम इज इक्वल्स टू कंजम्पशन. अभी मुझे इसमें इन्वेस्टमेंट को आर्ग्यू करना है एंड दैट्स टुडेज एजेंडा. इन अ बिट आई विल डू दैट. So this you can take a look at the first lecture to go over how I've explained. I've done a lot of things in it. There's a lot of math in it, average propensity and marginals and equations. You need to know these for your later discussions. All right. So now that we've done this, we want to introduce हमारा aggregate expenditure का जो C plus I plus G plus X minus M का मॉडल है, I want to today deal with investments. Number one thing about investments you have to keep in mind is that businesses do investments. How do they do investments? Well, they borrow money or they invest their own business money and they buy capital goods from it, machines and all, and they invest money in inventory, which is stocks, right? Because they're going to sell these things in the future. So they invest in machines, they invest in inventory. Okay. अब यहाँ पर जब हम investments की बात करते हैं तो there are two theories which will be discussed. That we have to question ourselves that these investments which are done by firms, are they autonomous or are they induced? What do we mean? So last time हमने कहा था autonomous means independent of income and induced means that something is dependent on income. What do I mean? One would argue that if national income goes up, if Pakistan's GDP goes up, so people in Pakistan will be earning more incomes and they will be spending more on goods and services. So businesses will be interested in investing more on machines and building inventory. And so the investments will rise. So what have I made the connection? I've said if income rises, investment will also rise from the businesses. इसको हम कहते हैं induced. That yes, if national income rises, investment rises. If national income falls, investment falls. The second theory says that no, investment is not dependent on national income, but rather it is dependent on the interest rate. Now, what is interest rate? Interest rate is when I go to the bank and I want to borrow money, the bank will tell me, okay, in Pakistan, the rate is 10.5%. So if you borrow money from us, the bank says you have to pay us 10.5% plus an extra fee for borrowing this money and investing. And if the interest rate falls down to, let's say, 7%, so now the business sees that Pele, I could have borrowed money at 10.5% to buy a machine and do business. Now I can borrow it at 5%. So that's encouraging. So if interest rate falls down, let's invest. Now, this theory of ours is saying investment is dependent on the interest rate. It has nothing to do with national income. But one can argue, bhai, if interest rate is falling down, I will be interested in buying more machines. But what if the economic conditions are not right? So that's the limitation, wala baat. But as long as interest rate goes, the second theory says this is how it works. So this is what we'll do today. The first theory I want to discuss is the induced one. It is called an accelerator theory of investment. And obviously, this theory says that investment is dependent on the country's national income. इसके लिए usually I talk about this particular example, see if it makes sense to you. Let's suppose Amazon decides they want to open business in Pakistan. All right. And so they say that we want to start our business in Pakistan of selling goods and services. And in order to do that, we will obviously require the infrastructure. Infrastructure is capital, machines. We're going to need warehouses. We're going to need warehouses with racking systems and robots and computers and a fleet of transportation, trucks. But what they're looking at is that if we come to Pakistan, we want at least incomes of, let's say, we want to do $1 billion ka kaam, okay, in our first year. We want to set up business, but we want at least $1 billion की income या output generate करनी है हमको. So in order to do 1 billion worth of output or services, how much setup do we need? They're going to do the whole calculation and they're going to come up with that if we want to do 1 billion, we should start with Lahore and Karachi, maybe two major big cities. And we will have to spend about, capital terms के अंदर, we would need an investment of about initial investment of about, let's say, $2 billion. Okay. Now, what am I talking about? If we invest 2 billion in the warehouse and trucks and fleets and robots and everything in Karachi and Lahore, we will be able to do business worth $1 billion. Okay, that's the requirement. तो पहले साल आपने ये कर ली investment, you put in the infrastructure. Assumption is that with that capital, if you decide that next year we want to continue making 1 billion ka income, you already have the investment. You've already done this 2 billion ka infrastructure. Now, this infrastructure every year is going to generate $1 billion worth of output for you. So you don't need to do any new investment. There is no need. Let me write over here. How much new investment do you need? Well, you say, I don't need any investment because you've already done the initial investment of 2 billion, which was required. And so there's no need. But next year, third year, your plan is to double your output. So now Amazon realizes that 2 billion ki initial investment was only good enough for 1 billion worth of output. We don't have enough capital to do a 2 billion. So then they might decide that, you know what, in order to do 2 billion, we need to go into Islamabad and we will need to invest more. How much do we need? 2 billion ke liye, how much total requirement of investment do we need? So the math says you should have at least $4 billion worth of capital if you want to do $2 billion worth of output. 2 billion you've already invested. You just need a new investment of $2 billion. This could be like our required capital that you need investment. You already have 2 billion in place. You just need to do 2 billion ka additional. Okay. Are we following so far? That how the numbers are working?
Yes.
Yeah. In year four, the business decides that we want to double on that also. And instead of 2 billion, we want to go to 4 billion. in our fourth year. So let's put in Faisalabad and Gujranwala also in this mix and expand our operations. $8 billion output के लिए we at least need to have $8 billion worth of capital. So simple hai, already 2 billion are in place. We just need to put in another 2 billion in of investment and we'll be able to double. Because you've already two होगा, four होगा. What do you think? Is it going to be 2
4
billion I
नहीं
have to put in? It
जो
should be.
2 plus 2 plus 2.
Yeah, it should be 4 billion. Now, the thing is, what economists have said is, yeah, you understand that 2 billion worth of investment gives you 1 billion. So, in a way, the output that you're producing and the input that you need to put in, which is capital, there is a ratio. We can clearly see there is a ratio. Put in $2 and it will give you $1 ka return. That's the ratio. We call it capital to output ratio. The capital to output ratio is 2. Uh, तो हो क्या रहा है? Let's say in year 5, you plan to even accelerate and you plan on going to 8 billion worth. So then you take in Hyderabad and Quetta and Pindi and all of these places also into account. And you know the required investment you need to have is about 16 billion. You already have about 8 billion. You need to put in another 8 billion worth of investment. But let's say year 5 के अंदर you decide let's consolidate. Year 6 में, sorry. Year 6, let's maintain 8 billion for a year. Let's take a breather. The required capital is 16. You already have 16. So how much net investment do you need going from year 5 to year 6? So we say you don't need any investment. You've already done enough investments, right? So there's no need. Year 7, COVID hits. And you say that, okay, logistic businesses are down. We'll be lucky if we are able to do 6 billion worth of business. You've already done investment worth 16 billion. The required capital for 6 billion is 12 billion. But you already have investment of 16 in place, machines and capital and all. So the accelerator theory suggests you need to take out 4 billion worth of investment from the system. You need to shut down some of your warehouse, sell off some of the fleet. You don't need it because the business is falling. Year
Okay, could you
7.
explain this?
Yeah. Sometimes what happens is because economic conditions and demand goes down, economic cycles में चलती है ना, sometimes there are peaks, but sometimes जैसे कोविड के टाइम पे क्या हुआ था पूरी दुनिया के अंदर, कोविड के टाइम पे we knew that businesses sort of were suffering because people were not buying goods and services. Simple as that. When people are not buying goods and services, the demand fell. Okay. और जब demand गिरी, तो businesses decided that we need to cut down on the scale of the business. यहाँ पर that is what we are showing. If the business which was doing 8 billion worth of business last year, but this year they're only doing 6 billion worth, the output has fallen. When output has fallen, my infrastructure is already there. जो मेरा infrastructure है, वो तो 8 billion worth output के लिए आपने 16 billion की investments की हुई है. But next year output is falling. You don't need that much investment. You only need 12 billion worth of investment. So this is showing that you have to actually sell off some of your resources, machines and all, because you don't need that much investment. ये जो 16 हुआ हुआ है ये तो 8 billion output के लिए है. For 6 billion, all you need is 16 billion. So liquidate your assets, basically. That's what's happening over here. We're liquidating our assets. Does that make sense?
So, sir, because the demand has decreased, that's why you're letting go of a few assets.
Yeah,
Right. Okay.
yeah. And so the investments are in negative.
Okay.
So in this whole model, we're saying that if demand rises in the economy, firms' demand for capital rises in the economy. Okay, capital के लिए मैं K use कर रहा हूँ, but basically I'm talking about investment here. And इस मॉडल के अंदर हमने ये बात भी की है that there is something called a capital to output ratio and it remains fixed, जो कि इस केस के अंदर equals to 2 है. So आइडिया ये है, एक फॉर्मूला है एक्सेलरेटर थ्योरी का. एक्सेलरेटर थ्योरी का एक फॉर्मूला है which is A times change in Y. Okay? What is this explaining? ये एक्सेलरेटर को थ्योरी का फॉर्मूला है. It is telling us नेट इन्वेस्टमेंट, कितनी नई इन्वेस्टमेंट करने की जरूरत है, is dependent on an accelerator coefficient times change in income. यह फॉर्मूला एक्चुअली मैंने लेफ्ट पे अप्लाई भी किया हुआ है. लेट मी शो यू हाउ. सबसे पहले ए जो है, let me rearrange this formula. I equals to A times change in Y. I'll just rearrange and keep A on one side. The accelerator coefficient है क्या? So let's keep A on one side and take national income on the other side, basically. That's what I've done. Okay. A is equals to I over change in income. I is investment, I is capital. And change in income obviously is talking about output. Output and income is interchangeable. तो A जो है हमारा वो कैपिटल टू आउटपुट रेशियो है. That in order to produce $1 worth of things, how much worth of dollars of machines do I need? कोई भी फैक्ट्री होती है, बल्कि इनफैक्ट लेट मी जस्ट ब्रिंग इट डाउन टू अ कॉफी शॉप. एक कॉफी शॉप है, उसका जो कैपिटल है, इट्स द एस्प्रेसो मशीन. ओके, दैट्स द कैपिटल, दैट्स द इन्वेस्टमेंट. जब एक बिजनेस स्टार्ट होता है तो वो कहता है कि एक मशीन की आउटपुट कैपेसिटी इज दैट इन अ डे इट कैन प्रोड्यूस 200 cups, let's say. In a day, the capacity, you continuously work for X number of hours, एक machine can only produce 200 cups. Okay? अगर आपकी daily demand is 200 cups, that coffee machine is good enough. But if your demand goes up to 400 cups, then one machine is not enough. You're going to invest in another machine. If your demand rises to 600 cups, you already have two machines. Okay. So the new investment you need to do is another one more machine. Assumption kya hai? The same machine can only produce 200 cups. We know in reality technology changes, right? In this instance, we're going to assume that technology is the same. That's why हमारा capital to output ratio, we always assume it to be constant. Acha. Same coffee shop. Initial demand is 200. You have yourself one machine. Capital to output ratio is one machine gives you 200 cups. What if the demand goes up to 250? Then what do? If you get yourself the second machine, it has the capacity to produce 200 cups, but your demand is not going up to 400 cups, it's only going up to 250. Well, ये जो हमारी theory है, that fails to recognize this problem. Our theory is assuming that if the demand goes up by 2, say 4 billion, you can invest just the required amount. Okay, you will always be at full capacity. लेकिन हमने ये कॉफी शॉप के एग्जांपल में देखा कि sometimes there is no investment that you can do when the demand rises too little. Sometimes you're underutilized. So if the demand goes up from 250, let's suppose आपने क्या किया when it was 200 cups in one machine and your demand went up to 250, you decided to get another machine. Your capacity is 400. You're utilizing 250. That means you have spare capacity available. If income rises, you don't need to do new investments because you already have the machine with spare capacity. So investment zero. Do you follow? हमारे इस मॉडल में we're continuously assuming that you're always at full capacity. You have the ability to do just the right amount of investment that fulfills the demand. But reality में that's not true. हमने machine के केस में देख लिया. Sometimes जब एक business की demand goes from 200 to 400, businesses in reality don't say, ke, okay, so our demand has doubled this month, so let's order another machine. Sometimes what you feel is that let's see if this is a continuous demand for the coming months. And then we shall, order. तो हर दफा ये नहीं होता. इस मॉडल में क्या हो रहा है? Demand goes up, investment rises, let's do it. And ऑन पेपर तो हम फॉरेन से इन्वेस्टमेंट्स को लेकर भी आ रहे हैं और फॉरेन से इन्वेस्टमेंट निकाल भी रहे हैं. सो फॉर एग्जांपल, for the same coffee shop, let's say they're making like 600 cups with 3 machines, and now the next month, when summer is here, coffee demand falls down, and now only 400 cups are getting sold. तो मैं क्या करूं? Should I sell that machine? And when the winter comes, should I buy this machine all over again? तो रियलिटी के अंदर नेगेटिव इन्वेस्टमेंट्स इतनी आराम से नहीं होती है because of the falling demand. This theory has certain problems in it, okay? That it is taking capital to output ratio is constant. You're getting the same kind of machine, same model of machine. You're not upgrading your technology. While we know कि reality के अंदर new models gives you higher productivity. So the accelerator theory is saying that investment is dependent on the changing income, changing demand. So, whatever the demand is changing by, all you have to do is multiply that with the capital to output ratio, and it tells you how much new investment needs to be done. So, that's our first theory that yes, investment is induced. Investment is dependent on the change of national income. Any questions on this?
No, sir.
All right. But then, obviously, we also have to talk about another theory. The second theory we have is called marginal efficiency of capital or investments. दोनों acceptable terms हैं. How do I explain this? All right, let's take a look at it. Let's suppose I can borrow money from the banks and I can, you know, do whatever business. मेरे पास certain options हैं of what I can do. I can open up a coffee shop. I can open a grocery store, and I can open up a school. तीन business options हैं मेरे पास. I can borrow money from the bank, and the bank is willing to lend me money at 3% interest. Interest के लिए ये small r use करते हैं. I can borrow the money at 3% and I can invest in one or any of these businesses. Should I do the business? Should I do all of them? Should I just do coffee shop? Should I just make a school? The thing is, not enough information is there. Obviously, I have to see my returns. If I borrow 3%, will I get at least 3% return or not? तो इसको हम ले लेते हैं something called rate of return or rate of investment, ROI. Okay? The ROI for coffee shop is 6%, while grocery store is 10%, and a school's ROI is 15%. School is much more lucrative for every dollar I spend in it as compared to coffee shop. But I also know that coffee shop requires a lot lesser money than opening a school. Capital requirement के point of view से. But the thing is, if I don't have any limit of the amount of money I can borrow, coffee shop gives me a return of 6%, grocery 10%, school 15%. So which of these business should I do? So my opinion is, let's do all of them. On a coffee shop, I'm going to get a return of 3% extra net. In grocery store, I'll make about 7%. And in school, I'll make about 12%. I'm going to make good money. Let's do all of the business. But economic condition changes and the bank's interest rate rises to, let's say, 8%, right? Now, if I borrow money from the bank, I have to pay bank 8%. So which of these projects would I be interested in doing now? So definitely not the coffee shop. I'm going to lose 2% on a coffee shop. I don't want to do this. Grocery store and school is still going to make me money. So I'll do it, right? And if the interest rate goes up to, let's say, 12%, I won't do this, I won't do this, and I will only stick with school. तो मेरी इस theory के अंदर, what I have sort of like connected this whole thing is that if interest rate goes up, the amount of investment in the economy falls. And if interest rate goes down, the amount of investment goes up. तो इधर मैंने इकोनॉमी की डिमांड, नेशनल इनकम और इन्वेस्टमेंट का कोई रिलेशन नहीं दिखाया है. Over here, the entire relationship of investment is dependent on the interest rate. Interest rate goes up, we invest less. Interest rate goes down, we invest more. इसका डायग्राम बनता है एक MEC कर्व का. This is how the diagram sort of looks like for this one. जब हम बनाते हैं, it's a simple diagram. एक तरफ हम interest rate. So how much investment will be done is dependent on the interest rate, okay, and the rate of return. If there was few investment being done, obviously वो जो कम investment है, that कम investment would be going in sorry, just 1 second.